But Mom, that ring could get us a lot of food. That's true, Mom said. But it could also improve my self-esteem. And at times like these, self-esteem is even more vital than food. Mom's self-esteem did need some shoring up. Sometimes things just got to her. She retreated to her sofa bed and stayed there for days on end, crying and occasionally throwing things at us. She could have been a famous artist by now, she yelled, if she hadn't had children, and none of us appreciated her sacrifice. The next day, if the mood had passed, she'd be painting and humming away as if nothing had happened. One Saturday morning, not long after Mom started wearing her new diamond ring, her mood was on an upswing, and she decided we'd all clean the house. I thought this was a great idea. I told Mom we should empty out each room, clean it thoroughly, and put back only the things that were essential. That was the one way, it seemed to me, to get rid of the clutter. But Mom said my idea was too time-consuming, so all we ended up doing was straightening piles of paper into stacks and stuffing dirty clothes into the chest of drawers. Mom insisted that we chant Hail Marys while we worked. It's a way of cleansing our souls while we're cleaning house. She said we're killing two birds with one stone. The reason she'd become a tad moody, she said later that day, was that she hadn't been getting enough exercise. I'm going to start doing calisthenics, she announced. Once you get your circulation going, it changes your entire outlook on life. She leaned over and touched her toes. When she came up, she said she was feeling better already and went down for another toe touch. I watched from the writing desk with my arms folded across my chest. I knew the problem was not that we all had poor circulation. We didn't need to start doing toe touches. We needed to take drastic measures. I was 12 by now, and I had been weighing our options, doing some research at the public library and picking up scraps of information about how other families on Little Hobart Street survived. I'd come up with a plan and had been waiting for the opportunity to broach it to Mom. The moment seemed ripe. Mom, we can't go on living like this. I said. It's not so bad, she said. Between each toe touch, she was reaching up into the air. We haven't had anything to eat but popcorn for 3 days, I said. You're always so negative, she said. You remind me of my mother. Criticize, criticize, criticize. I'm not being negative, I said. I'm trying to be realistic. I'm doing the best I can under the circumstances, she said. How come you never blame your father for anything? He's no saint, you know. I know, I said. I ran a finger along the edge of the desk. Dad was always parking his cigarettes there, and it was ribbed with a row of black cigarette burns like a decorative border. Mom, you have to leave, Dad, I said. She stopped doing her toe touches. I can't believe you'd say that. She said, I can't believe that you, of all people, would turn on your father. I was Dad's last offender, she continued, the only one who pretended to believe all his excuses and tales and to have faith in his plans for the future. He loved you so much, Mom said. How can you do this to him? I don't blame Dad, I said, and I didn't. But Dad seemed hell-bent on destroying himself, and I was afraid he was going to pull us all down with him. We've got to get away. But I can't leave your father, she said. I told Mom that if she left Dad, she'd be eligible for government aid, which she couldn't get now because she had an able-bodied husband. Some people at school, not to mention half the people in Little Hobart Street, were on welfare, and it wasn't so bad. I knew Mom was opposed to welfare, but those kids got food stamps and clothing allowances. The state bought them coal and paid for their school lunches. Mom wouldn't hear of it. Welfare, she said, would cause irreparable psychological damage to us kids. You can be hungry every now and then, but once you eat, you're okay, she said. And now you can get you cold for a while, but you always warm up. Once you go on welfare, it changes you. Even if you get off welfare, you never escape the stigma that you were a charity case. You're scarred for life. Fine, I said. If we're not charity cases, then get a job. There was a teacher shortage in McDowell County, just like there'd been in Battle Mountain. She could get work in a heartbeat. And when she had a salary, we could move into a little apartment in town. That sounds like an awful life, Mom said. Worse than this? I asked. Mom turned quiet. She seemed to be thinking. Then she looked up. She was smiling serenely. I can't leave your father, she said. It's against the Catholic faith. Then she sighed. And anyway, you know your mom. I'm an excitement addict. Mom never told Dad that I urged her to leave him. That summer, he still thought of me as his biggest supporter, and given that there was so little competition for the job, I probably was. One afternoon in June, Dad and I were sitting on the porch, our legs dangling over the side, looking down at the houses below. That summer it was so hot I could barely breathe. It seemed hotter than Phoenix or Battle Mountain, where it regularly climbed above 100 degrees. So when Dad told me it was only 90 degrees, I said the thermometer must be broken. But he said no, we were used to dry desert heat, and this was humid heat. It was a lot hotter, Dad pointed out, down the valley along Stewart Street, which was lined with those cute brick houses that had their neat square lawns and corrugated aluminum breezeways. The valleys trapped the heat. Our house was the highest on the mountainside, which made it, ergo, the coolest spot in Welch. In case of flooding, as we'd seen, it was also the safest. You didn't know I put a lot of thought into where we should live, did you? He asked me. Real estate's about 3 things, Mountain Goat. Location, location, location. Dad started laughing. It was a silent laugh that made his shoulders shake, and the more he laughed, the funnier it seemed to him, which made him laugh even harder. I had to start laughing, too, and soon we were both hysterical, lying on our backs, tears running down our cheeks, slapping our feet on the porch floor. We'd get too winded to laugh any further, our sides cramping with stitches, and we'd think our fit was over, but then one of us would start chuckling, and that would get the other going, and then we'd both end up shrieking like hyenas. The main source of relief from the heat for the kids in Welch was the public swimming pool, down by the railroad tracks near the Esso station. Brian and I had gone swimming once, but Ernie Goad and his friends were there, and they started telling everybody that the Wallses lived in garbage and would stink up the pool or pool water, something awful. This was Ernie Goad's opportunity to take revenge for the Battle of Little Hobart Street. One of his friends came up with the phrase health epidemic, and they were going on to the parents and lifeguards that we needed to be ejected to prevent an outbreak at the pool. Brian and I decided to leave. As we were walking away, Ernie Goad came up to the chain-link fence. "Go on home, to the garbage dump," he shouted. His voice was shrill with triumph. "Go on now, and don't come back." A week later, with the heat still holding, I ran into Denisha Hewitt downtown. She'd just come from the pool and had her wet hair pulled back into her scarf. "Brother, that water felt good," she said, drawing out the word good, so it sounded like it had about 15 O's in it. "Do you ever go swimming?" "They don't like us to go there," I said. Denisha had nodded, even though I hadn't explained. Then she said, "Why don't you come swimming with us in the morning?" By us, I knew that she meant other black people. The pool was not segregated. Anyone could swim at any time, technically at least, but the fact was that all the black people swam in the morning when the pool was free, and all the white people swam in the afternoon when admission was 50 cents. No one had planned this arrangement, and no rules enforced it. That was just the way it was. I surely wanted to get back in that water, but I couldn't help but feel that if I took Denisha up on her offer, I'd be violating some sort of taboo. "Wouldn't anybody get mad?" I asked. "'Cause you're white?" she asked. "Your own kind might, but we won't, and your own kind won't be there." The next morning I met Denisha in front of the pool entrance, my thrift shop one piece rolled inside my frayed gray towel. The white girl clerking the entrance booth gave me a surprised look when we passed through the gate, but she said nothing. The women's locker room was dark and smelled of pine sol with cinder block walls and a wet cement floor. A soul tune was blasting out of an 8-track tape player, and all the black women packed between the peeling wooden benches were singing and dancing to the music. In the locker rooms I'd been in, the white women always seemed embarrassed by their nakedness and wrapped towels around their waists before slipping off their underpants, but here most of the women were buck naked. Some of them were skinny with angular hips and jutting collarbones. Others had big, pillowy behinds and huge swinging breasts, and they were bumping their butts together and pushing their breasts up against each other as they danced. As soon as the women saw me, they stopped dancing. One of the naked ones came over and stood in front of me, her hands on her hips. Her breasts so close, I was terrified her nipples were going to touch me. Denisha explained that I was with her, and that I was good people. The women looked at one another and shrugged. I was going on 13 and self-conscious, so I planned to slip my bathing suit on underneath my dress, but I worried this would only make me more conspicuous, so I took a deep breath and stepped out of my clothes. The scar on my ribs was about the size of my outstretched hand, and Denisha noticed it immediately. I explained that I'd gotten it when I was 3 and that I'd been in the hospital for 6 weeks getting skin grafts, and that's why I never wore a bikini. Denisha ran her fingers lightly over the scar tissue. "It ain't so bad," she said. "Hey, Nisha," one of the women shouted, "your white friend's got a red coming in." "What'd you expect?" Denisha asked. "That's right," I said. "Collar got to match the cuffs." It was a line I'd heard Denisha use. She smiled at it, and the women all shrieked with laughter. One of the dancers bumped her hip up against me. I felt welcome enough to give a saucy bump back. Denisha and I stayed at the pool all morning, splashing, practicing the backstroke and the butterfly. She flailed around in the water almost as much as I did. We stood on our hands and stuck our legs out of the water, did underwater twists, and played Marco Polo and chicken with the other kids. We climbed out to do cannonballs and watermelons off the side, making big geyser-like splashes intended to drench the many people. sitting poolside as possible. The blue water sparkled and churned, white with foam. By the time the free swim was over, my fingers and toes were completely wrinkled and my eyes were red and stinging from the chlorine, which was so strong it wafted up from the pool in a vapor you could practically see. I'd never felt cleaner. That afternoon I was alone in the house, still enjoying the itchy, dry feeling of my chlorine-scoured skin and the wobbly bone feeling you get from a lot of exercise, when I heard a knock at the door. The noise startled me. Almost no one ever visited us at 93 Little Hobart Street. I opened the door a few inches and peered out. A balding man carrying a file folder under his arm stood on the porch. Something about him said government, a species Dad had trained us to avoid. Is the head of the household in? Who wants to know? I said. The man smiled the way you do to sugarcoat bad news. I'm with Child Welfare, and I'm looking for either Rex or Rosemary Walls, he said. They're not here, I said. How old are you? He asked. 12. Can I come in? I could see he was trying to peer behind me into the house. I pulled the door all the way closed, except for a crack. Mom and Dad wouldn't want me to let you in, I said, until they talked to their attorney. I added to impress him. Just tell me what it is you're after, and I'll pass on the message. The man said that someone whose name he was not at liberty to discuss had called his office recommending an inquiry into conditions at 93 Little Hobart Street, where it was possible that dependent children might be living in a state of neglect. No one's neglecting us, I said. You sure? I'm sure, mister. Dad work? Of course, I said. He does odd jobs, and he's an entrepreneur. He's developing a technology to burn low-grade bituminous coal safely and efficiently. And your mother? She's an artist, I said, and a writer and a teacher. Really? The man made a note on a pad. Where? I don't think Mom and Dad want me talking to you without them here. Come back when they're here. They'll answer your questions. Good, the man said. I will come back. Tell them that. He passed a business card through the crack in the doorway. I watched him make his way down to the ground. Careful on those stairs now, I called. We're in the process of building a new set. After the man left, I was so furious that I ran up the hillside and started hurling rocks. Big rocks that took 2 hands to lift into the garbage pit. Except for Irma, I'd never hated anyone more than I hated that child welfare man. Not even Ernie Goad. At least when Ernie and his gang came around yelling we were trash, we could fight them off with rocks. But if the child welfare man got it into his head that we were an unfit family, we'd have no way to drive him off. He'd launch an investigation, ended up sending me and Brian and Lori and Maureen to live with different families, even though we all got good grades and knew Morse code. I couldn't let that happen. No way was I going to let lose Brian and Lori and Marie. I wish we could do the skedaddle. For a long time, Brian, Lori, and I had assumed we would leave Welch sooner or later. Every couple of months, we'd ask Dad if we were going to move on. He'd sometimes talk about Australia or Alaska, but he never took any action, and we asked Mom. She'd start singing some song about how her get up and go had got up and went. Maybe coming back to Welch had killed the idea Dad used to have of himself as a man going places. The truth was, we were stuck. When Mom got home, I gave her the man's card and told her about this visit. I was still in a lather. I said that since neither she nor Dad could be bothered to work, and since she refused to leave Dad, the government was going to do the job of splitting up the family for her. I expected Mom to come back with one of her choice remarks, but she listened to my tirade in silence. Then she said she needed to consider her options. She sat down at her easel. She had run out of canvases and begun painting on plywood, so she picked up a piece of wood, got out her palette, and squeezed some paints onto it, and selected a brush. What are you doing? I asked. I'm thinking, she said. Mom worked quickly, automatically, as if she knew exactly what she wanted to paint. A figure took shape in the middle of the board. It was a woman from the waist up with her arms raised. Blue concentric circles appeared around the waist. The blue was water. Mom was painting a picture of a woman drowning in a stormy lake. When she was finished, she sat for a long time in silence, staring at the picture. So what are we going to do? I finally asked. Jeanette, you're so focused, it's scary. You didn't answer my question. I said, I'll get a job, Jeanette, she snapped, and she threw her paintbrush into the jar that held her turpentine and sat there looking at the drowning woman. Qualified teachers were so scarce in McDowell County that 2 of the teachers I'd have at Welch High School had never been to college. Mom was able to land a job by the end of the week. We spent those days frantically trying to clean the house in anticipation of the return of the child welfare man. It was a hopeless task, given all the stacks of Mom's junk and the hole in the ceiling and the disgusting yellow bucket in the kitchen. However, for some reason, he never came back. Mom's job was teaching remedial reading in an elementary school in Davie, a coal mining camp 12 miles north of Welch. Since we still had no car, the school's principal arranged for Mom to get a ride with another teacher, Lucy Jo Rose, who had just graduated from Bluefield State College and was so fat she could barely squeeze behind the steering wheel of her brown Dodge Dart. Lucy Jo, whom the principal had more or less ordered to perform the service, took an instant dislike to Mom. She refused to say much during the trip, instead playing Barbara Mandrell tapes and smoking filter-tip cools the entire time. As soon as Mom got out of the car, Lucy Jo made a big show of spraying Mom's seat with Lysol. Mom, for her part, felt that Lucy Jo was woefully